Jacob said something as well that was interesting when you were talking about whether or not the ordinary life was very good, which is a fair question. Similar to the question of like, what's the value of life? Is life worth living? But more targeted. And then you went on to say, when you were talking about your own pursuit of to do something exceptional, you used the phrase just to justify my existence, which I thought was interesting.
That's deep.
Um, yeah, it is, but it's true. It's like I think it's dead on. I think the I'm just curious actually to ask you where you think that sense that your existence is something that has to be justified comes from.
Mm.
Therapy. Like,
I think it's proving something to myself that my previous self like would be happy. So like say I think for my like a bit of my story, like I've never really had I've grew up like not poor but like less than like medium money, like on the poorer side. And so I think there's I guess that just forms like some promises to yourself and sort of other things as well about like I guess other sort of insecurities and things. And I think you just want to justify that by overcoming it. So as a kid growing up, I think certain problems will really resonate and will really make a stain. And I think as you get older, I think you attempt to fix those problems. Um,
Mm,
and and that's the story that you kind of tell yourself of like when I do fix the money side, um then I've succeeded. I've justified that. I've justified my existence by now being able to provide for my future children. So I think it comes from a being dealt what you have in your genetic lottery and then certain problems like the universe certain problems arise and you then existentially it's you're kind of born to overcome that because it's your own problems and it's your own hand in life, something that's very I guess yeah I think it's individual like that. Yeah.
mm,
I think that the thing that I find, or the phrase that I find difficult, that is the justification of existence, because and I relate to you on many levels. That's why I'm close. But using that phrase makes it seem like if you then don't go and do the thing that you feel destined to do, which obviously there's the chance of that happening, the rate of success is not 100%, then for some reason your existence then won't be justified. And what do we do about that? I mean,
Mm,
it's not true, but you may feel like it is, and that's what matters ultimately at the end of the day, is that the mental life. And I agree with your point that, we maybe the wounds we have as children, because it's all relative, right? All of us didn't grow up in, abject poverty, but the wounds that we have emotionally as children and young adults and teenagers do carry us through, I think, into adulthood. And we do feel motivated to justify them and fill those holes and heal those wounds out in the world. And that's what I think Carl Jung meant when he talks about the establishment of the ego in the morning of life. I don't know know about this, Angelo, but his idea that the first half of human life for Jung was about grounding the ego in the material world so that it felt good enough. And then the second half of life was about renouncing all of that shit and looking inward and going into the deeper, more internal parts of and stages of individuation. And I feel that a lot. I mean, for me personally, I don't have a great relationship with my father, and I'm somebody with a disability. So that's the combination, that's the cocktail that has fueled pretty much everything I've done, I think, under the surface. Because maybe I'm trying to prove something to a father figure that doesn't really exist. And maybe that's why philosophy and psychology and lecturers and fucking Jordan Peterson and David Goggins spoke to me so much because they acted as virtual stand-in fathers that I didn't have. And then trying to talk on a podcast and sound smart or be a good athlete is just trying to distract people from the fact my legs don't work properly. I mean, it's a deep thing to think about, but there's certainly an element of it, you know? And so part of growing up, I think, is identifying what you're being driven by, those motivations that are really vices that you've tried to mold into virtues, and kind of picking them apart one by one until you get to a healthier place and a healthier motivation. But maybe you have to go and do the thing, or at least try, or at least spend a good proportion of your existence trying to justify yourself before you get there and you look into the dragon scroll and you're not satisfied with what you see, because you might still just see the little boy that doesn't feel good enough. But maybe you have to get there to have that revelation. I don't know. I mean, do our stories sort of seem akin to yours, Angelo? Because
Yeah.
in this space, I think all people in this space are driven by some kind of wound. Because like you say, there are people that are happy to be ordinary, but it takes us a trip round the houses and to read all this stuff and discuss all these ideas to then be at the point they were at in the beginning.
Absolutely. I think the most important part to all of this is, and this is why I picked up on the justify my existence thing, because that was totally my perspective for years and years as well. Like, I wrote it in my whole thing about leaving school when I was 12 years old. Like, it was a very clear picture in my head that the ordinary life was unjustified, that it was unjustifiable, even, that you couldn't justify it if you tried. It was totally not worth it, basically. And so the problem with that is, you said about turning your vices into virtues and all this stuff, and it's important not to swing too far in the other direction and start thinking, okay, well, I shouldn't pursue anything. I shouldn't do basketball. I shouldn't try to build a podcast. I shouldn't do any of these things because, oh, well, they're just vices dressed up as virtues. It's like, that's not exactly the point that I'm making at all. Like, there's nothing wrong with basketball. There's nothing wrong with sports or figure skating or doing a podcast or starting a YouTube channel. I'm doing one. The problem is in the avoidance. Like, when you say vice, it often has the implication of avoidance. Like, we have our vices to avoid certain things, unpleasant feelings and whatnot. And I think that picture in your head, that inner picture you have of mediocrity, of ordinariness, of the ordinary life, is something that you can avoid. You can be in a state of avoidance of when you feel like you couldn't justify it, when you feel like it's not justified. Then your whole existence becomes a form of avoidance against that thing. And you can get good at stuff still. You can still have a decent life if that's the case. I mean, you could be Michael Jordan. That's fun. But what I think is really interesting is that that's essentially like shadow content then. Like, the picture of yourself as an ordinary person is a shadow picture of yourself. It's in your shadow. It's something you're scared of and avoiding. And like Jung said about the shadow, it's powerful. It's got powerful contents. And so what I think is worth trying to do, this is something that's happened with me over the past year that's had a massive impact, is the integration of that shadow content. So, like, what would it mean to love myself if I was ordinary? What would it mean if the ordinary life was justified and was good? What would be different about my value judgment? What would have to be different about my value judgments and my priorities and my worldview for that to be true? And that's a really important question, I think, because if you can overcome that fear of an ordinary life, I promise you, not only will you be liberated from a very tyrannical and violent inner faction within your inner civil war, but you'll also then gain the power that they had, and you'll be able to pursue your actual thing with a newfound freedom, because it's no longer this heavy, scary thing of, let me justify my existence by doing this, and if I fail, then my existence isn't justified, which, I mean, God, suicidal implications of that are scary. Like, it's a really heavy thing to be operating from that place. But if you can integrate that shadow, if you can genuinely look mediocrity in the face and accept it wholeheartedly, then your actual pursuits become more like a dance, because it's like lifting a weight off of your shoulders, and you can move with a certain lightness afterwards that makes you more agile. It makes you more like more free to essentially play in that space. And I think that's what you see with the example of Alyssa Liu, coming back to the figure skating thing, is that somebody who learned to throw all of that extra weight off had to fully, with her whole heart, walk away from the sport entirely, and then came back infinitely better than everybody, just because she didn't have that heaviness anymore. There's an ability to I mean, you know this with anything. If you feel like you need something, it's almost it makes it so much harder to get. Like if you're speaking to a really attractive girl and you feel like you need her approval, oh God, you'll be stumbling over your words. You won't be able to form a coherent sentence. It'll be awkward and stiff, and there'll be no sense of play. It won't be enjoyable, and you'll beat yourself up afterwards. And the same thing can happen with careers. And so, yeah, I really think that not just you guys, like our whole generation, I think, has got this issue, and I'm so happy that I've made progress on it. And yeah, I think it's where I don't think anybody's really talking about that much at the moment. I think everybody's still sort of chasing the golden apple, but there's really something worth. There's really a treasure in the shadows as well that's worth keeping.